Psalm 20. I'll do my best to not prolong the message tonight, because the later it gets, the colder the wind chill is going to be. So I'm just glad you're here tonight, even in spite of the already cold weather. Although we have a lot to be thankful for. We're not in Minnesota and Illinois and Wisconsin. What are you excited about? Excited? What are they excited about? Okay. All right. Okay. Well, let's stick with geography for later. But anyway, they had no mail in those places. To some of those places today, they did not deliver mail. It was so cold. Some places, getting to 30 below wind chill, 50 below wind chill. Northern Minnesota particularly, just absolutely brutal. And the thing about the wind out there is there are very little hills to break the wind. So when you're in the Midwest, it's mostly flat, and it's just nasty. So we can be thankful that we do not have it as bad as they do, but we should pray for people there. There's already been a couple of lives lost in the weather there, and people, apparently some people going without heat because of some natural gas problems, and then some people I think lost electricity or something like that. So there were some people that were having some struggles there in I think Minneapolis is where that was. But anyway, thankful for a warm place here tonight. But Psalm 20, as many of David's psalms are regarding his and enemies, and whether it's when he was running from Saul or just in general, David being a man of war, he was familiar with conflict and battle and opposition. His son Solomon had a kingdom, for the most part, a peaceful kingdom, very much different than David. But David was a man of war, a lot of battles in David's life, both in his own personal life and then as a nation, and leading the nation as the king. So let's read this psalm, Psalm 20. We're going to focus just on one verse for the most part tonight, but we're going to work our way down through the psalm. But we'll focus on one verse as the main point. Psalm 20, the Lord hear thee in the day of trouble. The name of the God of Jacob defend thee. Send thee help from the sanctuary and strengthen thee out of Zion. Remember all thy offerings and accept thy burnt sacrifice, Selah. Grant thee according to thine own heart and fulfill all thy counsel. We will rejoice in thy salvation, and in the name of our God we will set up our banners. The Lord fulfill all thy petitions. Now know I that the Lord saveth his anointed. He will hear him from his holy heaven with the saving strength of his right hand. Some trust in chariots and some in horses, but we will remember the name of the Lord our God. They are brought down and fallen, but we are risen and stand upright. Save, Lord, let the King hear us when we call. Now, by way of introduction, I want to give you what one commentator said about this first verse and the first part of this psalm. But first, before that, let's go to Lord in prayer. Heavenly Father, I pray that you'd please speak to us through this psalm tonight, particularly the main verse and the main point. May it make a difference in our lives for your honor and glory. May your will be done. May we have open hearts to receive your word. In Jesus' name, amen. The commentator says, according to the view expressed in the introduction to the psalm, this is the language of the people praying for their king, or expressing the hope that he would be delivered from trouble and would be successful in what he had undertaken in the prosecution of a war, apparently of defense. The word trouble here used would seem to imply that he was beset with difficulties and dangers, perhaps that having offered sacrifices and prayers for the purpose of securing the divine favor on the expedition. The point or the moment of the psalm is when those sacrifices had been offered and when he was about to embark on his enterprise. At that moment, the people lift up the voice of sympathy and of encouragement and pray that those sacrifices might be accepted and that he might find the deliverance which he had desired. So the commentator's explaining here that picture the king offering sacrifices, offering offerings. He's getting ready to go to battle, and the people were there witnessing this. He's getting ready to go to battle. He's offering these sacrifices, and so then the people are giving him well wishes. Now, a lot of times these psalms are David's desires and his personal crying out to God, his personal prayers. But here we have the participation of the people in this psalm, where they are wishing certain things upon David and those who are going to battle. And so we see that in verse 1. The Lord hear thee in the day of trouble. The name of the God of Jacob defend thee. Send thee help from the sanctuary and strengthen thee out of Zion. So this is basically, it's like a prayer of the people. They're speaking to David, but it's really a wish, kind of like when we would say, God bless you. May God's blessings be upon you. May God grant you whatever it may be. It's well-wishing. And these are specific for the purpose of going to battle, and that asking that God would defend Jacob, or not Jacob, the God of Jacob defend these, what it says, that God would defend David. And then, so that continues down through in verse 4, grant thee according to thine own heart, and fulfill all thy counsel. It's kind of, we would say more of in a secular term, I wish you the best, or I hope you get your wishes granted, may your wishes be granted. But in this case, it has to do with, in conjunction with God's will. We will rejoice in thy salvation. And so it seems as if there's, in verse 5 to 6, there's a transition that takes place here. We will rejoice in thy salvation. In other words, when David is delivered from his enemies and from this battle that's going to be fought, we will rejoice. And in the name of our God will we set up our banners. The Lord fulfill all thy petitions. And banners, when it comes to banners, that's like a flag. It's a standard in battle that you carry the flag. And there was we have Josiah still has this on his door, the words to part of this song, but the battle cry of freedom. Rally round the flag. Rally round the flag. That's because the flag, when it comes to battle, it is, you're taking the flag goes forward because you're fighting for a certain nation or whatever the flag represents. The flag is an important symbol. And so flags can be used for good or bad, or represent good or bad things. There's even someone who, we have the United States flag, of course. If the flag represents the United States and what it stands for, our founding principles. And when I look at the flag, I think of, it just screams out liberty and freedom, liberty and justice for all. Unfortunately, justice many times is perverted, and oftentimes more and more people are losing their freedoms here in America. But as our nation was founded, we were founded on the principles of freedom and liberty and justice, and that's what the flag represents. Even in a Christian sense, there's someone who designed a Baptist flag. Now, not the regular Christian flag. There's a different Christian flag that's more broadly used, but actually somebody designed a Baptist flag. And it says, it's red and white, and it says the book, the blood, the blessed hope. So what does that flag represent? It represents the book, the Bible. We stand with the Bible, the blood of Christ, and then the blessed hope, the fact that Jesus is coming again. That was how someone designed the Baptist flag. So a flag represents something, a banner. And here it says in verse 6, it says, we will set up our banners. In the name of our God, we will set up our banners. So those banners, whatever they look like, we don't know what they look like, but whatever they look like, they represented standing for God, represented the name of the Lord, that we are standing for the Lord. And we're standing with the Lord, we're trusting in the Lord. Now, really the main point tonight I want to get at is asking the question, in what or in whom are you trusting? And we'll get to that verse here in just a moment. Now in verse 6, the king responds, now know I that the Lord saveth his anointed. He will hear him from his holy heaven with the saving strength of his right hand. So we have the people, then there's more of a personal address in verse 6, but then in verse 7, we have again we spoken there. But this is the main verse I want to focus on tonight. Some trust in chariots and some in horses, but we will remember the name of the Lord our God. In what are you trusting? There are three things mentioned here: chariots, horses, and then the name of the Lord. Chariots, these furnished great advantages in war by the speed with which they could be driven against an enemy and by the facilities in fighting from them. They were usually very simple. They consisted of a light pole suspended between and on the withers of a pair of horses, and after the after end resting on a light axle tree with two low wheels. Upon the axle stood a light frame, open behind and floored for the warrior and his charioteer, who both stood within. On the sides of the frame hung the war bow, and in its case a large quiver with arrows and darts had commonly a particular sheath. In Persia, the chariots, elevated upon wheels of considerable diameter, had 4 horses abreast, and in early ages there were occasionally hooks or scythes attached to the axles. In early ages, these constituted a main reliance in determining the result of the battle. In other words, whoever had the best and the most chariots, there was a good chance they were going to win that battle. And that's why it's so amazing when God would give Israel the victory. Oftentimes in the Old Testament we see that He'd give them the victory even against a nation that had just multitudes more chariots than they did. The ones that were the best outfitted, the ones who had the best equipment, they were the ones that seemed like they were the most likely to win. So it says in verse 7, some trust in chariots. In other words, some trust in physical materials built as a result of man's ingenuity and design. You know, something that's made out of metal or steel or something in that regard, of these strong materials. Those things, you can do a lot with them. And they can stand the test of time. They can take abuse. They can take a beating. And so some would trust, you know what, we have the best chariots. That is what's going to give us the victory. That was what the people were saying here. Some trust in chariots. There's some that their only basis, and they're resting their hope for victory on their chariots. But we don't have chariots today in the sense of the way they had them then. I guess unless you want to call your vehicle a chariot. But you don't usually fight a battle in your vehicle, your car, truck, or van, that type of thing, using your vehicle. Although I did hear, you may have heard about the road rage incident where a guy drove, I think, for 3 miles at a high rate of speed with a guy hanging on to his hood. It just happened not too long ago, and so both of them got charged with something, but it had to do with road rage. And so in that regard, he was using his vehicle for a purpose like that. But anyway, but today there are many times people will trust in physical materials. They will trust in man's ingenuity, man's design. Now, can man do quite a bit? Absolutely. But it's important that whatever man does that's good, that God be given the credit for it, realizing it's God that has given man the ability to do these things. And yet so often people are putting their trust in man so that when things go wrong, something goes wrong in the world or in society, there's a problem or maybe a widespread problem, why haven't we fixed this yet? Why haven't we fixed this yet? Like, we should just be able to do anything. There's a lot that man can do. But it's important to never trust in man's ingenuity and man's capability of designing things more than the God who created that man. So they say, some trust in chariots. Now, in the context of going to battle, in the context of conflict, it's the same way. We should not trust in man's designs. Our hope and our focus and our trust should not be in man's design and man-made things to help us through conflict. And there is a balance to this, and I'll share that with you in just a moment. But it says some trust in chariots. And then it says, and some in horses. Now, the chariots and horses obviously go together, so there's a tie here. But think about the significance of horses. They are some of the most powerful and able creatures and were great assets in war. I mean, horses have been used in war going back. They're not used now, but I mean, all throughout history before modern technology and vehicles and other things, horses were used in a widespread way. Why? Because they're powerful. They're strong. They have great capability. Not only are they powerful and strong, they're also fast. You can also, you mount up on a horse and you're high up, and you can have a great view, and you can go places with a horse, and you don't have to walk all that way or run all that way. And the horse is the one doing the work. They're strong. And so there are some who trust in what is, humanly speaking, most powerful and most able. But everything earthly ultimately falls short without the touch of God on it, without our trust ultimately being in the Lord. There's so many ways we can try to maneuver and design things and use whatever is here on this earth, but without the Lord and our trust in the Lord, first of all, we are expending. Ultimately, people will wear themselves out going on from one thing to the next, but then in the end, they fall short because they're not trusting in the name of the Lord. They're not trusting in God. So it says, some trust in chariots and some in horses, but we will remember the name of the Lord our God. So what's the message here? The message here is that, when someone's trusting in their chariot, and when someone's trusting in their horses, when they're trusting in all these earthly things, they're not thinking about God. They're thinking about those other things. That's where their mind is. That's where their trust is. But they said, we will remember the name of the Lord our God. So in other words, we're not going to forget about God just because there are these things existing in earth, on earth. We're going to remember the name of our God and trust in Him. No matter how powerful the things of this earth were, they were going to trust in God for the victory. And the Old Testament is full of victories in battle that were certainly just by the hand of the Lord. By the way, our history in our country is, the founding of our country, the history is full of examples of how God's hand was upon our nation in its founding. Things that man could not have orchestrated, man could not have done, but God allowed to happen. And so, no matter what we have at our disposal, earthly speaking, remember the Lord. Trust in Him. Let Him be your first place where you go for trust and help, for victory. Now here's the balance I mentioned. Proverbs chapter 21 and verse 31 says, the horse is prepared against the day of battle, but safety is of the Lord. So we see the horse is prepared against the day of battle. So in other words, the day of battle is coming. What do you do? You get your horse ready. You prepare the horse. If you used horse. Now today, maybe you clean your rifle or whatever if you're going to battle. But whatever equipment is at your disposal, and whatever equipment is at our military's disposal, they want to make sure that it's working in good form. They want to make sure it's not going to malfunction, and that if there's a war, then we got to be ready. We've got to have our equipment ready. And so in this case, the horse, that's what they had, that they used. It was their main mode of transportation in that for battle. And so they relied on the horse quite a bit. So the horse is prepared against the day of battle, but safety is of the Lord. Great balance here, great perspective. Think about it in today's terms where, the car or your whatever vehicle is, if you have one, the car is inspected, the car is maintained, the oil is changed, the tires are inflated, the windshield wipers are in good condition, but safety is of the Lord. So no matter what I do, no matter what you might do, in whatever area of life, I just use the car as an example, but whatever you do to physically have something ready and prepared, realize that those are great things to do, but we still must trust that ultimately safety comes from the Lord. The horse is prepared against the day of battle, but safety is of the Lord. There are times that, you know what, I thought I had all the ducks in a row. I thought I had everything squared away and ready, whether it's driving or maybe some other things. And in the end, I was relying on the Lord for safety. Something really major, really bad could have happened if it were not for the Lord intervening or the Lord protecting, the Lord shielding. So no matter how well. So in saying that we should remember the name of the Lord our God, does that mean we don't use earthly things? Does that mean we don't get prepared with earthly things? No, God has given us earthly things to be good stewards of them, to take care of them. And they should be, if we have a vehicle, we should keep it in as good working condition as we can, keep it roadworthy. But recognizing that, even if I've got brand new tires, I'm still relying on the Lord for safety from a tire blowout. Even if I've got new brakes, you know what? I'm still relying on the Lord that I'm going to be able to stop in time if somebody is crossing the street very suddenly. As a matter of fact, several weeks ago, maybe it was a month ago at least now, I saw someone almost get hit by a car. I mean, it was just that close. And I didn't almost hit them, but I was sitting I was ready to turn onto a more main type street, and there was a crosswalk over here to the left of me where I was going to turn out. I think I was going to go left, and I'm waiting for a vehicle to go by, and actually there was a vehicle coming this way. They stopped for a pedestrian. It was at night, but they stopped for a pedestrian. This pedestrian's crossing the street, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, this other vehicle came, and I couldn't see them right away because there were other parked vehicles blocking. But all of a sudden, I see this vehicle come out of nowhere and got so close to that person. I mean, so close that he just jumped out of the way. Now, they did stop in time. He kind of jumped almost as a late reaction. But for a second there, I thought, he's going to get hit. He is going to get hit. And he almost did. And what's interesting is that the person, I was out driving, doing the driving with Uber, and the person I just dropped off just a couple minutes before had told me that someone had been killed crossing the street there months ago or sometime earlier last year. And then I go around the corner, go around the block, and there's someone almost gets hit. But and no matter what precautions we take, so whether it's the horse here in Proverbs 21:31 that I quoted to you, the horse is prepared against the day of battle, but safety is of the Lord, whether it's them preparing their horses, chariots, whether it's us in our vehicles and it's us in our home, the things that we have at home, even if those things are taken care of and maintained and we take precautions to stay safe, and it's great to take precautions to stay safe, ultimately the Lord is the one who has to protect us, because anything we do to stay safe, well, depending on what happens, might not be enough. Something else might go wrong that we did not foresee. So we must have an attitude and a spirit of reliance upon the Lord. And then in verse 8 in Psalm 20, it says, they are brought down and fallen, but we are risen and stand upright. So they're recognizing the great victory that God was going to give them. They're trusting Him for the victory. And then in verse 9, save, Lord, let the King hear us when we call. Interesting that the king of Israel and the people there, that they would be calling upon a greater king. And David the king, the great king, as great a king as he was, he knew there was a greater king, and that king is the Lord. So what is it tonight you need to change in your perspective and your attitude, your spirit? In what are you trusting? In whom are you trusting? So many trials and troubles we face in life, the world's answer is, well, you know what, just try harder. Just believe in yourself. Just buckle down and you can pick yourself up by the bootstraps. And there's times when you just need to make the decision, I'm going to do this. But we must remember, and we must say those types of things, and we must commit ourselves to doing what is right with the recognition that without the Lord I can do nothing. I must have the Lord's help. I must seek the Lord. I must trust the Lord. So no matter what kind of determination you have, don't let it be a humanistic determination that you're just relying on yourself, because in our own flesh we are weak. But with the Lord, He can give us strength, He can give us help, and we must trust Him. We must trust Him. So are you trusting the Lord tonight? Or are you trusting in a chariot or a horse? Figuratively speaking, I don't think anybody here is a chariot, or nobody has a horse here, I guess. Somebody might have a toy horse. But there's people who have horses still today. But we don't use horses in the same way as they used them back then. So whether it's a horse, whether it's a chariot, in a manner of speaking, those things that seem so strong and enable you to seemingly do great things, and the product of man's ingenuity and such a creature of strength, no matter what you have, are you trusting in those types of things, or are you trusting in the Lord? Are you looking to the Lord? That's how we need to live our lives, is have a deep-rooted trust and confidence in the Lord for victory over our enemies. Now, sometimes the enemy that we face is within. So it doesn't matter what the enemy is, whether it's our own mind that we battle, our own thoughts, our own struggles, our own flesh, or whether it's an outward type of enemy, we still must trust the Lord. He's the one who can give us victory. We must seek Him, go forward, trusting the Lord.